is we look at different missions that the soul has on Earth. What is your soul mission? Is your soul mission to bring more love to humanity, to support humanity in its evolution? Or is your soul mission to experience pure joy, pure bliss? Is your soul mission to struggle in this incarnation so that you can gather something to come back in another incarnation and experience something else? So we look at the agreements and what the mission is.
Very interesting. I did a previous video series and we went through a couple of different things in terms of that. There's a book, actually, I don't know if you know about it. It's called Radical Forgiveness by Colin Tipping. Do you know that book? So he talks about that concept. He says that we're all on a spiritual journey and everything that's happened to us in our life is happened for a reason. And it was our soul's mission to go through this in a specific way so that we can come to whatever our purpose is, just basically mirroring exactly what you said. So yeah, I think that is a fabulous explanation, and I like the Fuck Me Cafe. I think many of our listeners can relate to the hopefully in a positive way as well as the other side.
Yeah, it brings some lightness into some of the most painful moments of our life. When you can look at a painful moment in your life and you're like, oh God, not again. Did I really sit down in the Fuck Me Cafe and ask for this? So it helps bring ownership, lightness, and shift us from the victim role to a place of empowerment. And it's important. I always like to say that it's really important when you're thinking about soul agreements and attracting people who are going to perpetrate against you so that you can learn something that your soul wanted to learn. It's important to remember that that person loves you so much that they are perpetrating this act against you and also agreeing to any consequences that are a result of that agreement to perpetrate against you. So it doesn't relinquish people from consequences of their actions. If somebody, sometimes I'm resisting using this example, but it's a really important example that's coming to mind right now. You take, for an example, rape. Somebody commits the act of rape. Just because you're thinking of the Fuck Me Cafe and soul agreements does not mean that that person held accountable or does not need to have any consequences, because they're agreeing to perpetrate that in this incarnation with the set of laws that we have agreed to as a society. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to create any pain for you, or that you don't have a right to feel like a victim or to feel pain or to experience trauma. It doesn't mean that whatsoever. What it means is that you have a responsibility to find what part of that is yours, what you want to own to take you from victim to empowered, and to allow your soul to receive what it needs to receive, and also allow the perpetrating force to take ownership for what they agreed for and to accept consequences that they have also agreed to as well.
I think that's a fabulous example, and I'm sure there may be listeners either from my previous series or anyone who's listening now, because I know that there have been questions, actually, even for that book, of people in that kind of situation. Whereas, like, how can that possibly be a spiritual experience? And I have to agree with you that I think everything is a spiritual experience. I was, I went through domestic violence. And, I somehow questioned, why did I put myself there? What made, and so I went back, I had to actually, I went through this work, with coaches, but also on my own of maybe, so I had to come up with my own reasons of why I put, I invited the situation, it didn't just happen. Just like you said, it was a soul agreement. And, and so, but I feel like I have a higher mission. I had to go through that in order to come to this other mission of like, how could you put, for example, for myself, I'll just talk for myself. So I put myself in the situation, but now, and this was 4 years ago that my husband passed away. And so, and now I'm in a completely different situation of opening up myself, not just, through my voice, but also I'm, telling other women, other men to be very open with their bodies as a way of a message to find either their sacred partner or just sacred love, because part of really being in, loving people and loving a partner is to be very open with your body. Yeah. And when you have fear of someone hurting you, you almost have to go through that to understand how sacred you actually are.
Wow. That is a beautiful example of the process of waking up to your power, because such an experience that creates an illusion of such disempowerment you took, and you allowed yourself to do the work to shift it into a place of power where now you are supporting the growth and evolution of many through what you and the perpetrator agreed to do on a soul level.
Yes. And I have to say, for any of our listeners who have been in similar situations and maybe blaming or hating the perpetrator, I went through that as well until I came to the point of actually accepting his love, because I was married to the person. I obviously had love for him. But in the aftermath, I didn't, and I went through this whole process, and I realized that he did this for me. He did this, maybe we did it for humanity, and my next situation, its chapter is going to be something else. But I invite anyone who's listening to just possibly, pause for a moment and just think about that. Because, even when I was silent when this happened to me, when I was in the marriage, nobody knew about it until afterwards, which is very classic in those kinds of cases, because you're unable to speak. It's just like, I don't know, something happens to the person that you're just like, and it could be a man, it doesn't have to be a woman. Many times it is a woman, but I've heard of men, either as a child, they've been situations where they're also just silent, and men especially. I'd have to say this because I just feel it coming out, that if there are any men listening and that's happened to them, the few people that I've met that have gone through something like that refuse to go through therapy. They refuse to talk about it, maybe with a girlfriend, maybe with somebody who they care for and trust. But I would just recommend anybody who's going through that to seek help, whether it's a friend or a family member, or even talking about it with the perpetrator, but still seeking more if they need it. Yeah. Because women are much easier to deal with. I don't know. They just have that feeling of talking to other women and, creating community. But men, I feel, and I want to have your opinion on this, since you do this kind of work, like, how do you help men in these types, maybe not domestic violence, but any kind of situation where they're having difficulty? How do you support them?
I love it that the conversation is going here. The beginning of my journey of doing this work was with people who experienced some extreme sexual trauma. I started this parts work with sexual trauma, basically supporting people who experience sexual trauma. And so with men, there's an extra layer of identity that typically leads them to suffer in silence, because you have kind of the cultural identity of what it is to be masculine. Be masculine is to be a rock and nothing affects you. You don't have emotions. And if you do, you're weak and you're not a man. And so many men have an extra layer to work through before they can even come to the point of disclosing or being willing to acknowledge what they experienced in starting the work. the healing work. So, but there was something that you said that I just wanted to highlight, that it just, I felt it in my soul when you said it. Oh, that you and the perpetrator of, was it your husband you said?
Mm-hmm.
So you and your husband did this for yourselves and also for humanity. That is so huge, to see how something that we believe many times while we're in these situations, it's just happening to us, and we blame ourselves for it. When we can expand our view and see it from a far enough viewpoint outside that we can see that this is happening for us and also for humanity, it's one of the most healing experiences, and it helps with what I find is the key to processing trauma, especially sexual trauma, forgiveness. It supports us in finding that true, authentic forgiveness. Anybody can say, I forgive you. But to really embody that forgiveness, it takes understanding the dynamics of what happened. Because if you don't understand the dynamics and you believe that you are a victim of what happened and you're just blaming, there's no space for forgiveness. Why would you forgive someone who you're blaming for hurting you and only hurting you? But when you can expand out and you can see that there's more than just pain and hurt and blame, there's more of a space for forgiveness. And I've worked with a lot of people with sexual abuse, and I can confidently say 100% that nobody that I worked with or have experienced that has had sexual trauma that hasn't embodied the full forgiveness of perpetration has been able to access the peace around their sexual trauma that they want to access. Unless they allow themselves to fully embody forgiveness, it's almost impossible to access the peace that they want to access around their trauma. So, yeah, this is a very conversation.
Yeah, that's actually what that book is about. So I recommend anybody who's listening is to read that book, Radical Forgiveness, because that's exactly what he talks about. And he actually asks the readers to write letters. Like I wrote a letter, like 3 letters to my husband. He's dead. But I wrote him, like, in the beginning, like my anger, like how upset I was about it. And then kind of the softening of like, well, maybe there could have been reasons, or, the second letter is a little bit, I don't remember exactly the reason, but the third letter was one of love. Like, I know that you did this for me out of love. And, I may not understand what that means or why, but and it actually was a huge process for me, because doing that helped my children as well. And that's what I wanted to just say. I've said it in others, but I think it's important to reiterate that this process that people can go through with Lloyd's work, with my work, about really recognizing what's going on in your life and being aware of it, and coming to a place of acceptance, not only opens you up in ways that you've never before imagined, but also opens up the connections you have, including your children, your partner, your family members, and your body, because I think that, especially in trauma victims, I can imagine, I wasn't a victim of sexual trauma, but I can imagine that parts of themselves are closed. Women sometimes say that they could have multiple orgasms, but they don't feel euphoric. And so there's something that's blocked, and it could be a traumatic event that occurred in their lives they just have not accessed. I'd like you to respond. I want to say one thing. I know we're almost getting to a close, even though I feel like we're just starting.
Part 2 coming up.
But I'd like you to give us your feedback if you have any.
Yeah. I love how you highlighted the point that a trauma that isn't explored or investigated can stop us from experiencing